Ukrainian forces repel 131 Russian attacks on eastern front lines. That was the headline on January 1st, 2026. The start of the new year was anything but quiet. We are talking about a relentless, high-intensity holiday battle.
A brutal 24 hours.
Exactly. Ukrainian forces just absorbed an almost unbelievable amount of fire and still somehow held the line. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports.
And that intensity is exactly where we need to start. For this deep dive, we're going to analyze the raw data coming right off the front lines. So we're talking about the turn of the new year, December 31st into January 1st. And we're going to put the sheer material cost of these assaults right up against the strategic context. You know, the staggering rate of Russian attrition and the Kremlin's, frankly, growing crisis in trying to generate new forces for 2026.
I'm Alex. Join me with Aria in the latest Deep Dive by Defense Report for a sharp, no-nonsense breakdowns of the latest in global defense news, military technology, and strategic developments. And today we're going to cover the staggering reality behind those 131 clashes and what that massive Russian drone campaign over the new year truly signifies for 2026. Okay, so let's just dive right in. What did it actually look like on the ground in those hours leading up to January 1st?
The one word that defines it is saturation. Just pure saturation of firepower. The Ukrainian General Staff confirmed it, a shocking 131 combat engagements recorded across the Eastern Front on December 31st alone.
And to really get a sense of the pressure they were under, we have to look at the munitions fired before those engagements even kicked off. Give us the breakdown on that initial bombardment.
It was a storm. I mean, 77 airstrikes and 182 guided aerial bombs. But the true scale, comes in the ground attack figures. A colossal 3,587 shelling attacks, and then the drones. Over 6,000 kamikaze drones, 6,406 of these one-way attack vehicles deployed against Ukrainian positions in just one day.
Wait, hang on. Over 6,000 kamikaze drones in a single 24-hour window? I mean, does that figure even compare to anything we've seen before? It sounds like they just emptied the entire magazine.
It is an incredibly high figure, a real outlier. While the daily reporting on drone usage fluctuates, this kind of concentration on one single day suggests an attempt at, well, complete paralysis. They were trying to paralyze Ukrainian rear areas and command posts right before the main ground assaults went in. It really puts the intensity into sharp focus.
It's easy to get lost in those numbers. So where specifically were these 131 attacks focused? Where was the heaviest fighting?
They were heavily concentrated in four main sectors, what we're calling the Eastern Front grinder. The main flashpoint, without a doubt, was the Pokrovsk sector. This is the area west of Avdiivka, sort of a key gateway to the Donbass. It recorded 32 separate Russian attacks. And crucially, Ukrainian defenders managed to repel 23 of those, with 9 still ongoing as the day ended.
And we know from reports earlier in 2025, Russia was taking insane casualties in this sector, something like 400 a day. So why does Pokrovsk remain such a high priority, high cost objective for them?
It's all about the strategic asset it holds.
Yeah.
Pokrovsk is essentially important because of the Pishane coking coal plant. And losing this plant, it isn't just about Ukraine losing exports. It would slash Ukraine's total steel production down to maybe 2 or 3 million metric tons.
Wow.
Yeah, down from a projected 7.5 million. And that steel is vital for their own infrastructure, for defensive construction, for manufacturing, everything. If Russia is willing to accept that level of attrition, it means they see a massive strategic value in crippling Ukraine's industrial base.
And the grim numbers show they were making some headway even while paying that awful price.
They were. As of December 2025, Russian forces had seized over 2/3 of the town, about 67%, and 4/5 of the critical infrastructure had already been destroyed by October. So that combination of strategic value and attritional cost just makes it a truly desperate battleground.
Okay, so Pokrovsk was number one. What about the other 3 flashpoints?
Right, so after Pokrovsk, the Remivka sector saw 29 surges by Russian troops, a lot of those around towns like Trudov and Novodrivka, with 10 clashes still unresolved. Then the Lyman sector, further north, always active, reported 19 clashes. Ukrainian forces repelled 10 of those. And finally, you had the Kharkov sector with 18 engagements, and 7 of those were still in progress.
So Ukrainian forces were just absorbing this massive expenditure of Russian lives and munitions, but still repelling the majority of these attacks. Let's talk about that cost for the attacking side. If Russia's losing over 1,000 men a day for, marginal gains, how long can they possibly maintain that pace?
The cost was exceptionally high. The reported Russian troop losses for that single day were over 1,000, specifically 1,060 troops eliminated. And beyond the manpower, the equipment losses were substantial. 7 tanks, 4 armored combat vehicles, and a staggering 36 artillery systems lost overnight. This high-cost attritional warfare just continues to define their whole offensive effort. They have to keep generating forces just to replace the losses, let alone achieve any kind of breakthrough.
Okay, so that's the grinder on the ground. Let's shift focus to the air war that night. The ground combat kicked off right after a huge Russian air assault on the night of January 1st. What was the scale of that drone campaign?
The scale was massive. It was designed to be overwhelming. Russia launched 205 strike UAVs in that overnight attack. These were a mix of the Shahed types, the primary Iranian-designed suicide drones, and the Gerbera types, which are often their domestic Russian equivalent.
And despite that sheer volume, Ukrainian air defenses really put on a masterclass.
They really did. Air defenses were highly effective, shooting down or suppressing 176 of those drones.
That's a fantastic interception rate.
It is a truly commendable interception rate.
But, some always get through. What was the most significant infrastructure hit that Ukraine reported from that night?
The strikes were aimed specifically at the energy grid. The Volyn region took a significant hit to its energy infrastructure. This attack left 103,341 subscribers without electricity in the Lutsk and Koval districts. And the goal here, it isn't random. It's part of a concerted effort to try and split Ukraine's energy grid, making regional power supplies more fragile.
And while Russia was launching 205 drones, we saw this clear narrative inversion. Ukraine delivered its own long-range strikes. The mayor of Moscow reported several Ukrainian drones were intercepted over the capital on New Year's Eve, right as Putin's address began. That timing can't be an accident.
Oh, absolutely not.
Uh-huh.
And this brings us right into the realm of cognitive warfare. What's fascinating here is how the Kremlin tries to leverage these strikes for their own messaging. The sources highlight these highly dubious Russian claims of Ukrainian drones targeting Putin's own residence in Novgorod Oblast just days before.
And what makes those claims so hard to believe?
Well, the inconsistencies were just blatant. They were self-defeating. For example, one major general claimed 91 drones were downed targeting the residence, but the Ministry of Defense's own initial report only accounted for 47 in the same area.
Right.
But the real moment came when the Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, was pressed for evidence. He explicitly said he did not think there should be any evidence.
He actually said that.
Yeah.
That there shouldn't be any evidence for a massive attack. That is astonishing. When a government rejects the very idea of providing proof, it just signals the claim is purely for informational effect. It's a pretext.
Precisely. It's cognitive warfare 101. You frame the conflict for your domestic audience to justify future actions, like mass mobilization, whether the event even happened or not.
Okay, that puts that whole effort into sharp relief. Moving away from the propaganda battlefield, let's pivot back to Ukrainian resilience. Beyond the combat and the air defense successes, how is the private sector in Ukraine contributing? You highlighted the Steel Front initiative.
The Steel Front initiative, led by Renat Akhmetov's Metinvest Group, is a perfect example of this crucial non-state support. They are filling critical gaps that, national budgets often struggle to manage that quickly.
And their contributions go way beyond just basic supplies, right?
Oh, far beyond. One of the major efforts is medical capacity. They're constructing the second NATO Roll 2 underground hospital.
A Roll 2 facility, so that means surgical capabilities.
Exactly, advanced surgical and resuscitation capabilities. And building it over 6 meters underground provides so much more security, hugely increasing the survivability of wounded soldiers right near the front line.
What about direct combat applications?
They're adapting equipment directly for the fight. Metinvest upgraded 5 armored Kozak vehicles into full command and staff vehicles. But maybe the most innovative thing is the new armor screens they provided. These have been highly successful. They cause kamikaze drones to explode on the outside of the vehicle rather than penetrating, keeping the crews safe. It's that kind of private sector ingenuity that's vital.
Meanwhile, on the diplomatic front, Europe continues to solidify its support. Tell us about the European Council's decision just before the new year.
Right, so Europe reaffirmed its long-term financial commitment in a big way. The European Council approved a massive 90 billion euro loan package.
So that's roughly $106 billion.
Over 2 years, guaranteeing at least 45 billion annually. And this provides crucial operational stability against Moscow's attempts to just exhaust Kyiv's resources.
And crucially, President Zelensky's statement on this emphasized that these funds can be repaid only from frozen Russian funds. This links directly to leveraging those immobilized Russian assets.
It does. But this is where the political puzzle gets complex. It raises the big question. Why did some nations veto linking the loan directly to those frozen assets as collateral? There was internal opposition from Italy, Bulgaria, Malta, and Belgium that prevented Europe from immediately using those funds as security.
What was the core fear there? What was driving those vetoes?
It was a deep legal and financial fear. Many of those nations worry about setting this radical precedent of seizing state assets. They fear it could lead to Russian retaliation, freezing their own assets in Russia, or trigger massive counter lawsuits, destabilizing the whole global financial system. So the money is there, but the fight over the frozen funds remains very nuanced.
So while Ukraine secures that huge financial backing, let's zoom out. What does the lack of strategic success mean for the Kremlin as they head into 2026? What was the big failure of their strategy in 2025?
Well, if you connect all these dots, Russian forces largely failed to accomplish their main goals in 2025. They couldn't seize the rest of Donetsk Oblast, and they failed to establish those buffer zones they wanted in Sumy and Kharkiv. And while they did achieve a faster rate of advance than in previous years, that advance was still, at a foot pace, and it came at a devastating, completely unsustainable cost.
Which contrasts so sharply with the Kremlin's narrative. You had officials like Defense Minister Belousov and Putin himself claiming rapid advances and the inevitable collapse of Ukrainian defenses all through December.
The narrative just doesn't match the reality of their losses. The Ukrainian commander-in-chief, General Syrskyi, claimed Russia suffered 410,000 or more personnel losses in 2025 alone. That catastrophic casualty rate is the strategic problem that's now forcing the Kremlin into these huge policy shifts at home.
And that signals the real depth of their attrition problem. Tell us about the two major decrees Putin signed right at the turn of the year, which completely changed their approach to manpower.
These are major political moves. It shows their back is really against the wall in forced generation. First, Putin transitioned conscription from happening twice a year to a single year-round process starting in 2026. This basically keeps military recruiters active 365 days a year, letting them call up a larger volume of conscripts with more flexibility.
And the second decree, that one is perhaps the most domestically risky.
Absolutely. The second decree authorizes the compulsory call-up of inactive reservists for special training camps, and then eventually deploying them to protect critical facilities. This policy threatens that old social contract where the government avoided widespread compulsory call-ups for combat. By activating non-combat reservists, Putin is signaling that almost no one is exempt anymore, which shows just how desperate the need for manpower really is.
So to wrap up this whole cognitive warfare thread, let's use the Kupiansk sector to show how the truth is starting to crack the official Russian narrative, even at home.
Kupiansk is a perfect case study of a propaganda collapse. Official claims repeatedly insisted on the seizure of the town. General Gerasimov even claimed they had it as of November 20th. However, all the evidence shows Ukrainian forces actually liberated a significant portion of the town, regaining control over about 182 square kilometers in that area since early December.
So what does it mean for the Kremlin when their own internal sources, the mill bloggers, start publicly breaking ranks and calling the military command liars?
It means the battlefield reality is just overwhelming the censorship machine. The fact that Kremlin-affiliated mill bloggers publicly acknowledge this severe deterioration and blame the military command for blatantly lying, even to the very, very top, that is a profound exposure of internal distrust. It forces the domestic audience to question every official victory claim, and that undermines the entire foundation of their propaganda.
Okay, so bring it all together for us. Summarize the main themes of this deep dive.
The new year began with extreme, relentless combat intensity, especially on the Eastern Front. But it really demonstrated Ukraine's robust defensive capacity, and Russia's massive expenditure, coupled with their failure to achieve their 2025 goals, is driving this profound strategic adaptation for 2026, highlighted by drastic, risky new fourth-generation policies back home, all while Europe secures Ukraine's financial future.
So what does this all mean for you? The details we covered, the casualty ratios, the drone campaigns, the private sector ingenuity, the EU's financial commitment, they show that this conflict is moving from these highly attritional assaults to a strategic war driven by long-term manpower constraints and the quality of defensive fortifications. And here's a provocative thought for you to chew on. Considering the unprecedented commitment of Metinvest, a huge private company, to provide NATO-grade medical facilities and cutting-edge defensive armor, how will the role of large Ukrainian private enterprise continue to shape the course of the defense against an overwhelming military power in the coming year? You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex and Aria, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. We'll catch you next time.